Does your family ever get exasperated with you for stockpiling such things as paper towels, bottled water, or toilet tissue? Well, they certainly can't object to you stockpiling money. Silver, the only money recognized by the U.S. Constitution, and your first 10-ounce bar of pure silver can be had at spot price with no premium by going to sdbullion.com/rp. And when you buy it that way, you'll be supporting Reluctant Preppers as well by going to sdbullion.com/rp. Thanks. This is a quick update to thank you for building our number of patrons to 76 and growing on patreon.com/reluctantpreppers. Soon, when we reach 100 active patrons, we're going to start sending out a 1-ounce U.S. Silver Eagle each and every month to one active subscriber, so you don't want to miss out on that.
Please help us grow by subscribing today at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We're very privileged to have a returning guest tonight, Devvy Kidd. She is an investigative journalist. She's a published author and a veteran of radio. She was the voice on the air who inspired former IRS Special Agent Joe Bannister to leave his career with the IRS. Actually, after 2 years of investigating it, found that he had no other options to maintain his integrity and to start agentfortruth.com. Devvy had her own similar experience of finding that her career with the government in Cheyenne Mountain Complex was an example of government waste and fraud. She filed a petition against her own job and was shown the door. Devvy, thank you for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
My pleasure to be back. Thank you.
The first time we had you, you talked with us about your booklet, Why a Bankrupt America, and just reminding people that they can get a hold of that booklet by going to devvy.com. That's devvy.com. But in that booklet, and you address several of the rather provocative statements that you make on the front of that booklet, such as that the Federal Reserve that you pay usury for the trillions borrowed by Congress has never been audited. Not a single penny collected by the IRS funds a single function of the federal government. And that something that a lot of our viewers already know, that the Federal Reserve is neither federal nor does it have any reserves. But one thing we didn't get a chance to talk with you about is, so what can we do about it? You had mentioned at the very end of our talk that the correct response for a law-abiding and Constitution-loving patriot is not necessarily to go out and not file and not pay your income taxes.
No, we don't want to encourage anybody to do that because the system is stacked against we the people. These U.S. prosecutors and judges are in each other's pocket. And I think I brought up my late dear friend Tommy Greider, who was an attorney for over 40 years. He was in Shreveport, Louisiana. And Tommy, of course, was put on trial. They charged him first with tax evasion and then willful failure to file. And you're not allowed in these types of cases to bring any evidence into court regarding the application of the federal income tax against domestic Americans. He was able to get the government to drop the tax evasion charges, so they just brought him up on willful failure to file. The jury came back and unanimously declared him innocent. But unfortunately, even though you're acquitted by a jury of your peers, the government will come after you civilly for what they deem that is still due in taxes. As a result of Tommy's experience with this corrupt judiciary, he wrote a 97-page document titled The Memorandum, and anybody who takes the time to read it will understand that, as Joe Bannister probably said on your show, and what caused him to tender his resignation was an attack of his conscience, for one thing, but the fact that the federal personal income tax does not apply to domestic Americans, which is most of us However, in 1913, when these corrupt senators knew that they were going to push through this unconstitutional Federal Reserve Banking Act of 1913, they had to find a way to feed it. And so therefore they concocted, several years before, it takes years to get a constitutional amendment through X number of states, they concocted this 16th Amendment, which created this personal federal income tax, of which none of it funds a single function of the federal government. And we discussed this last time, that the government generates revenues from constitutional sources like corporate taxes, excise taxes, cigarettes, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, tires, things like that, military hardware sales, etc. All of that money goes into the Treasury. But the rest of this personal income tax goes for what they call transfer payments, and I think that was one of the biggest shocks for Joe Bannister when he was doing his research before he even contacted me, was when he was finding out that everything he'd ever been told and, of course, taught when he became a federal agent, a criminal investigative agent for the IRS, none of it was true. So here we are, 105 years down the road, plagued with this central bank and the powers that be, by hook or by crook, they are doing everything they can to maintain the terminally ill Federal Reserve System, and it truly is on life support. But they're doing it until a new global currency can be introduced. And a lot of people are buying into this idea that, you're just returning Federal Reserve notes to be redeemed in gold is a great idea, but it's not. It would simply play into their hands. It's just another trap, like the so-called fair tax. What's the other one? There's fair tax and
flat tax,
value
flat
tax.
Mm-hmm.
It accomplishes nothing, because those taxes still go for transfer payments. They don't go to support the constitutional functions of the U.S. government. And by that I mean there are half of the government, these agencies and cabinets, have no constitutional authority to exist. The Federal Department of Education, the EPA, foreign aid, none of that is authorized by the Constitution. But in the meantime, while they're trying to prop up this Federal Reserve System, which, as you mentioned earlier, the Fed has never been audited. And former Congressman Ron Paul, who was a champion, and he served twice. He served several terms, and he left Congress, and he went back to delivering babies, and then he decided to go back to Congress. He introduced a bill in 2007 to abolish the Federal Reserve Banking Act of 1913. There was 0 co-sponsors in the entire U.S. Congress. Not one single member of Congress would be a co-sponsor to the bill. And why? Well, because they need to keep borrowing from the candy store to keep spending all of these unconstitutional expenditures, like the National Institute for Health and Human Services, HHS. There's $1.1 trillion there for an agency that has no constitutional authority to exist. So you have all of this spending going on, and this debt of $21 trillion is going to sink us. There's no turning back at this point. It's gone beyond being able to be fixed. There's no fixing the Federal Reserve. For one thing, Congress never had the authority to turn over the currency and control of our currency to this private banking cabal. So my dear friend, Dr. Edwin Vieira, who is one of the most brilliant legal minds in this country, he's argued and briefed and won 4 times in front of the United States Supreme Court, and 2 of the cases changed federal law. Edwin's idea is to create electronic currency that the states themselves will use, whether it be gold or silver or bullion, so that when this whole Ponzi scheme collapses, and it's going to, and it will happen in our lifetime. We're not talking 50 or 100 years down the road. We are talking not in the not too distant future. What happened in 2008 is, well, what's happening now is worse because the problem was not addressed back then. And my new I'm doing a series of columns right now on newswithviews.com on the most important issues that the state legislatures need to deal with. Last week, it was on the destruction caused by the aerosol spraying and the geoengineering of our weather systems. My new column comes out tomorrow, and it's on this very issue. What Congress, and I forget the exact quote, I should have brought it up before, but when the crash of 2008 happened, Dirty Harry Reid, who's gone from the Senate, he's one of the biggest crooks ever to serve in the United States Senate. He came out, and said when it happened, he said, basically, we don't know what to do. This is uncharted territory. We don't know what to do. So if they didn't know what to do in 2008, when this whole thing implodes, and it'll be death if the states do not take action before that. And ironically, today, I was at, and I pushed this in one of my columns a couple of weeks ago, that it is absolutely critical that the American people get involved at the local level. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to get things done. And today I was at I belong to, and I'm registered no party, but I belong to the Republican Club here in Howard County, and once a month they have a luncheon. Today's speaker was representing the Freedom Caucus in the Texas State Legislature, and the woman who made the presentation was very familiar with the bill that I'm looking at. And the bill that there's two steps that need to be taken, and this is in my new column tomorrow. And if your readers or listeners want to read my columns, the easiest way to do it is just to go to my website, devvy.com, devvy.com, and you'll see right there, newswithviews.com. Click on it, and there's my archives. And you'll see the title of it, Top Issues for State Legislatures, Part 1. Tomorrow is Part 2. But it was amazing that when she made her presentation today, I asked her about this bill, because a constitutional sound money bill was introduced into our legislature last session. Now, that means our session ended in May of 2017. They go back in January. But this bill is relating to the use of gold and silver coins and bullion, and to protect the citizens of this state to be able to use gold and silver in payment of debt. And one of the individuals who's behind this had huge legal problems in that he paid his property taxes in gold. And the state came back, as well as the IRS, and said, oh, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. You have to use Federal Reserve notes. Well, when you buy gold, let's say that you bought, 15 years ago, if you bought gold at $2,000 an ounce, and at the time that you owed the tax, gold was $1,800 an ounce, okay, and your bill from the IRS, we don't have a personal state income tax, but this was property tax, and then the IRS got involved. In fact, instead of my friend having to pay out, I'm just picking a number, $1,800, he uses one coin that he paid $200 for. Well, that didn't sit well. And so he filed a writ of certiorari to the United States Supreme Court. This took a couple of years ago, and it took a while. The one case that the United States Supreme Court should have taken was that case. It was very, very important. So, because for his efforts and some other individuals who live close enough to the Capitol, and they put together this near perfect, really, constitutional bill to protect the citizens of the state. Now, Dr. Vieira made a presentation to the Montana state of Montana Senate Banking Committee in 2009, and he spoke to this committee. There were 9 Republicans and 8 Democrats on that committee, and he explained to them why it was critically important to create an electronic currency that the state would be able to use when the dollar crashes. Because when that happens, what are the states of the Union going to do? And I talked about this today in front of this GOP gathering, and this woman, she knew about the bill, but she did not know about this particular proposal for setting up the way for the states to be able to pay their bills. And she was quite intrigued by it, and so I, had a conversation with her. Now, she deals with what's called the Freedom Caucus in our legislature. But going back to Edwin, the presentation that he made to them as members of the legislature is very powerful. And his testimony, it's 9 pages long. The Republicans killed the bill. And I thought to myself, how foolish. You people do not seem to understand the problem with the manipulation of the currency. You don't seem to understand what's going to happen when this currency blows up and is absolutely worthless. And if you think it's worthless now, which of course it is, because in 1913, prior to this act being passed through Congress on December 23rd, a $1 U.S. $1 bill was worth 100 pennies in purchasing power. The same bill today in your wallet, that $1, the purchasing power is only 4 cents. So, the proposal that Edwin has is that the states set up electronic currency that is so easy to do. It can be done in 30 or 60 days, and it would be backed by gold and silver. And I told this woman today, this is particularly appropriate, and I pray that Texas does this in January, gets on it, because our new gold depository is now finished. The construction is done. And our governor is waiting for the New York Federal Reserve to return $1 billion worth of gold bullion to the state of Texas. Our governor and our legislators do not want Texas's gold to remain with the, quote, Federal Reserve in New York. So, but this is it's basically would be like an ATM machine, only it's all done electronically, and an electronic currency is workable constitutionally, technically, and politically. And it's so easy to do, and again, would protect the states. Let's just give it the worst case scenario. Let's just say that we have a 1929 and the currency crashes just like it did in the Weimar regime in Germany, where millionaires, and you can see the old photographs. The government has a website that has a bunch of old historical photographs. You see millionaires pushing wheelbarrows full of Deutschmarks to buy one bottle of milk. Well, you can just imagine what would happen when the states try to pay pension obligations, when they try to pay state employees, when they try to pay vendors. It will be mass chaos on the part of the states. Now, several years ago, Utah did pass a very watered-down bill. They called it a sound money bill, but it was backed by silver. But it's not the same as Edwin's blueprint for an entire system. And so, as the Federal Reserve, is a governing mechanism that is designed to manipulate the money and skew the workings of the free market for the benefit of themselves and their stockholders, well, these electronic currency for the states would benefit the citizens of the state and the states themselves. It would keep them from insolvency. It would allow them to pay the bills, and eventually, it doesn't have to be confined to the state of Texas. Let's just say that Texas passes this. I predict, and so does Edwin, and so do many of the other real experts on this who've been, studying money for 30 or 40 or 50 years, that other states will soon follow when they see how easy it is, what the benefits of it are. It's just like, they're waiting for the first person to take the first step. But other states would do it. States that have international obligations that they need to pay, it can all be done. It can all be done and up and running. And the use of gold and silver is legal tender. The states have every right to do it. The courts have backed up the state. There is absolutely nothing in the way of the states setting up an alternative electronic currency. And I agree with Edwin that this is the only solution, because trying to fix the Fed is impossible. And in my column tomorrow, I not only quoted Dirty Harry Reid, but also William Greider. He wrote a book called Secrets of the Temple. And I can tell you, I've been doing this 29 years, but 29 years and one day ago, if you would have told me I'd be reading these dusty old tomes, these books, I would have laughed, and laughed. But it's in books like Secrets of the Temple, written by William Greider, where he's one of the insiders, and he comes out and just really tells the truth, which he did. And I quoted him in my column tomorrow. He testified in 1993 in front of a congressional House Banking Committee. And he basically said, hey, you people in Congress are so dumb. You do not even understand the problem with the currency. You don't understand how the Federal Reserve works. And he said that the most important people left out of this whole conversation are the American people, because they don't know what's going on. They don't understand what's going on. And I also quoted Robert Reich. Remember old Robert Reich? He was Secretary of Labor under Slick Willie. He said he gave an interview for USA Today in 1999, and I used the quote in my column tomorrow. And he said basically people haven't figured out yet that the Congress is totally irrelevant. He said every once in a while, the Congress asks Alan Greenspan, because this was 99, to come up, take a trip up to the Hill and sit there, and they ask inane, stupid questions, and then Alan Greenspan goes back to the Fed and runs the country. He said it's the dirty little secret in Washington, D.C., but it's the Federal Reserve Bank that runs the United States. And so this Federal Reserve, these central banks, which are all now interconnected. I mean, Libya did not have a central bank before the imposter President Obama and his constitutionally ineligible Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. Not many people know this, but under the Emoluments Clause, she could not become Secretary of State, and there was a big lawsuit. I predicted why it would fail, and the judges agreed with what I had to say. But there were several countries who did not want to belong to the central bank, and in fact now we can see We can see that countries like Turkey and Russia, they all want to get away from the U.S. dollar, okay, because they see what's happening, and they want to deal in things like gold and silver. As a matter of fact, gold and silver, it's hard to get. I believe it was last week, I think, Friday, maybe I got the email, that the U.S. Mint, they're out of silver coins. They can't.
2018 Silver Eagles have run out. Yep, that's right.
Yes, they've run out. And governments are buying gold by the tons, not singular, but plural. And they're doing it for a reason. But in the case of Russia, Russia's got enough diamonds where they could buy the whole world if they wanted to, but they are buying gold. So what I said in my column tomorrow, what can people do? What do we do about these top issues? You have to give up your leisure time. You have to get involved at the local level, like I was today. And in my column, I said what you need to do is get a copy of my booklet. You have a copy of it. It's very precise, right?
Yep. And and quite informative, very concise.
Okay. And I recommended to people that they print out the bill from Texas that was killed by the Speaker of the House and the Republican Senate Banking Committee Chairman in May of 2017. Our legislature comes back in January, but thankfully Joe Strauss, who was the Speaker he was a rhino, a bad one. He's gone. They're going to elect a new Speaker in January. But what I recommended for people to do is you get a copy of the booklet, print out a copy of this bill, that constitutional sound money bill that allows the people in your state to use gold and silver for debts and this, that, and the other. And I gave the link, print out Edwin's testimony in front of the Montana Banking Committee, because he is speaking to the legislators. He is telling them exactly what the problem is in a very small economy of words, I should say. He explains it to them, and what's going to happen if they don't take steps to cut the ties with the Fed. Now, the states can still do business with the Federal Reserve if they want to. This is not a mandatory thing where they some states may choose to do that. But you and me and your listening audience are going to see some huge changes next year, and it's a dire situation. People should not, and I know you probably discuss this all the time, that people too many times they look at the stock market and they go, oh wow, look at that, stock market 20,000. They're only talking about the blue chip stocks. They're not talking about what else is going on. And one of the other things going on, of course, are the tax cuts. Now, Congress is getting ready to spend. The end of the fiscal year is September the 30th, okay? So they're going to spend their brains out. Now, and I said this in my column to be published tomorrow, when you're $21 trillion in debt, how is it? Then I gave one example that was just allocated, $234,000 to help take away the stigma of tranny women in Nepal. Now, I don't have $243,000, but that money has to be borrowed, and the interest on it is on your back, your children, your grandchildren, me, my daughter. None of that is authorized by the Constitution, but that's why they're in Washington real busy right now. I worked for the government. I prepared budgets for the Department of Defense. I know what I'm talking about. And in my column tomorrow, I mentioned, the rally that I had September 29th of 1993. We had thousands of people there. We took 1.8 million petition signatures to abolish the Fed and the IRS. Every member of Congress got a huge bundle of them. And while I was speaking out on the Capitol steps, and I had invited a few other speakers. In about 3 hours, we collected a little over 24,000 more signatures from tourists and a lot of employees from inside the Capitol. This was pre-9/11, of course, and anybody could walk in the Capitol. It's not that way anymore. It's a police state out there. I know because I've been there. But I still have the receipt from Dallas Denby. He was the clerk of the House at the time, and he signed the receipt for the additional signatures on top of the 1.8 million that we turned in. And one of the and we could tell who the employees were because they had badges around their necks. And one lady, I was standing there, and she said, "I want to sign the petition." She said, "But I got to tell you," she said, "I work for Senator Orrin Hatch." She said, "Are you Mrs. Kidd?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, he said, "We've gotten so many of that Bankrupt America booklet. I don't want any more. Throw them in the garbage." People, yeah.
Oh, he sent them. The people were sending them into their congressman.
Yep. But he was angry because it filled up his inbox. So what I suggested that people do is get the booklet, print out the bill for Texas, and print out Edwin's testimony. You have 3 items there. You get a hold of and this is easier to do in some states. I can tell you in states like New Hampshire and Maine and stuff, members of their state legislatures, they're the neighbors. You can go knock on the door. In states like California, trying to, even get an appointment with your state representative or senator is like pulling teeth. So each state varies, but it seems like, states like Montana, Idaho, in Kentucky, Tennessee, it's a lot easier. But go to your district office, and if you can't, take time off of work, if you know somebody who has a flexible schedule, so you go in. First of all, you try to make an appointment. And if you can get an appointment, this is what you're going to present to them and ask them, what are you going to do when, not if, but when the next collapse happens? What will you do? What will this state of Washington or, wherever, what state you're in, what are you going to do to protect the people of this state? How are you going to pay the bills? I want you to read this information. I want you to look at this bill. I want you to consider this. And this needs to be done now because most of the states are out of session. A lot of states are only in session, 4 to 6 months, and then they come back in January. Texas, Montana, North Dakota, and Nevada, we're out every other year. So our legislature's been out a long time ago. When I was doing research on the 17th Amendment, where I proved that 2 states did not vote to ratify it, therefore it's a law that doesn't exist, I actually found in Washington, D.C. at the National Archives, I didn't know it, but there were a lot of states back then that were out of session for 4 years at a time. And I thought, hooray! When they're not in session, they're not spending your money. But see, here in Texas, we don't have a personal state income tax. They can only generate it through gasoline and liquor and cigarettes and, things, and sales tax. So if they don't have it, they can't spend it. But in states like I left California, it's where I was born and raised, they tax you for every loony idea under the sun, and their legislature's open nonstop. But just because your legislature is out of session doesn't mean they're not busy doing something. And that was one of the things the speaker brought up today at the GOP club luncheon where I attended, that these Freedom Caucus members especially in the legislature are very busy. But bills are being written and submitted to committees right now. And they need to, if you don't have them in by November, it's very difficult to get a new bill introduced in your state legislature after January, because they take these thousands of bills and they dole them all out just like a deck of cards, and they're sitting in the committee. So when they, all get sworn in again in January, that's when, it starts with the committees and the debates and the this and that and the other. So the series that I'm writing, I thought I took it out of my purse when I came home, is on the top issues. And when I was able to speak for a few minutes today, and I said, one of the number one issues is the aerosol spraying and the geoengineering of our and weather modification programs that the U.S. government is doing that are so destructive to the states, especially, states like California with all of these fires. But, they're spraying the heck out of where I live here in Texas, and it has completely changed the weather patterns here. And, of course, I talked about the constitutional sound money bill and vote fraud, which I was ecstatic to find out that this is a big issue now with our state legislature and these machines, because I have been on the vote fraud issue since 1993. But I brought up a few other things that I think, are absolutely critical. Identity theft is one of them. And I wrote a column about this years ago. The states have a big responsibility as far as theft identity, because they've allowed companies to demand against the Privacy Act of 1974. In violation of federal law, they have allowed businesses and corporations to demand your Social Security number or refuse you service. When I was driving from El Paso to where I live here in West Texas, about 330 miles east of El Paso, I was on the phone. I had my doggies in my SUV. My late husband was in California, and my doggies were sitting. I was on the phone with the utility company, and the first thing the representative said was, is this TXU Energy? I said, listen, I just bought a house in Big Spring, Texas. I need the power turned on. Okay, well, let's get started. What's your Social Security number? And I said, you're in violation of federal law. You have absolutely no legal right to ask me for my Social Security number. And as smooth as butter. Oh, okay. Well, we have an $80 deposit, and if you make your payments on your utility bill 12 straight months consecutive, you get your deposit back. And it was the same for the phone company. It was the same for the cable. As soon as I brought up the fact that it was in violation of the Federal Privacy Act, they didn't even blink. They just said, oh, well, there's a deposit. They know. But people give out their Social Security, and the state legislatures have allowed this to go on. And they are big contributors to identity theft, which we know ruins the lives of millions of Americans. They get that number, and they've got the keys to the kingdom. So I had 8 different things, including pet overpopulation. The state legislatures are not doing enough. It breaks my heart. There's just not enough owners, enough people to save, the dogs and the cats and stuff like that. So, but anyway, so that's what I recommend that people do, and it's like I said, it'll be in my column tomorrow.
And just as long as you're mentioning the date of your column coming out, let everybody know that this is Monday, September 10th, 2018, that we're speaking. And I had a question for you back on the state currencies, if I could take us back to that.
Yes,
Is the proposal that there be, since we have 50 states, that there be potentially 50 different state currencies?
No. Oh, no. It'll all be backed by gold and silver or bullion. Probably gold bullion. When you're talking $1 billion, it's got to be bullion and not coins. And like I said, the states, they don't have to do this, but they should do this. They absolutely need to do this. And I'm trying to remember the name of the company, Overstock. You know that company, Overstock.com?
Sure.
Just about the same. They've invested a lot. They diversified a lot of their money into gold because they also believe it's going to collapse. And about, 5 or 6 years ago, the Texas university system, which also had decided that this, after 2008, they also bought $1 billion worth of gold bullion. Billion, not million, but $1 billion. So, yes, we have to have an honest money system, and it will blow open the free market in a way that people just can't imagine. Now, I did not bring this up today because I felt it would shock the attendees there. But one of them, and this will be in my series of top issues, is the constitutional militia. You know, and the militia has such a dirty word because of the media. But the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The first 13 words of the Second Amendment is what defines the Second Amendment. And so one of the things that I'm doing with a number of people is to put together a presentation for our governor, because he's a pretty good governor, really, Governor Abbott. Who's going to guard the depository with all that gold in it? Okay? The National Guard is not the militia. The constitutional militia predates Congress, and the state legislatures have the absolute authority to reconstitute the constitutional militia, being necessary for the security of a free state. So, one of these days you'll need to have Dr. Vieira on, because he is an amazing historian on the Second Amendment.
We would very much enjoy that. If you would put a good word in for us with him and help to make that connection, that would be great. We've had
I will send him an email, and I will ask him if it's okay to give you his personal phone number, because it will be an exciting show, really. Yeah. I have learned so much from, God blessed me so much. That 29 years I've been doing this, but I've known Edwin and a couple other constitutional attorneys. They have taught me so much over these decades, and didn't cost me a penny, and they've become dear friends. And I know all of this can be, depressing. It's closing in on us. Every place we look, there's lunatics. But one of the great things to come out of what I've been doing is the wonderful people I've met and gotten to know over all these decades. And meeting, even though I haven't met you in person, being able to know new people like you.
It's been a blessing to us as well, really. And frankly, Devvy, the way we found you was through Joe Bannister. The way we found Joe Bannister was because one of our viewers specifically had heard him and read his work and said, please have him on. And we've definitely had both viewer requests as well as guests on our show then help make the connection with other guests. And that is how we grow. And that's how we together spread this message of truth that is so lacking. If we go to the official sources, we're not going to hear these things. Just bombshell after bombshell after bombshell of these things that remind us of our constitutional roots and of the definition, the identity of our country, and what makes us free persons, and what we need to do. And you're right, we need to be willing to stand up and take specific action steps to solidify and reclaim that liberty. This has been an eye-opener again for us. And again, if people want to get a copy of your booklet is called Why a Bankrupt America, and they can get that on your website, devvy.com. We've been speaking with Devvy Kidd, a activist and patriot. Devvy, thank you so much once again for joining us on Reluctant Preppers.
Well, I appreciate it. And do click on newsreviews.com and take a look. It goes right to my archives, and look at these critical issues for the states. Your state, my state, all of the states. Anyway, thank you again, and I will send that email to Edwin for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Devvy. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Blessings. Bye-bye.